The talking head has no hands. So why is everyone afraid of it? There's a phrase from Pee-wee's Playhouse that sounds like nonsense and functions like truth. Mika, Lika, hi, Mika, hidey-ho. Jambi the Genie says it, the room reacts, and wishes get granted. It's funny because it's ridiculous, and it's terrifying because it's accurate. Because the world is full of Jambis, talking heads, screens, puppets, titles, roles, stories with no hands, somehow running entire lives. The body is loud. The mind is louder. A woman is caring for a man who cannot move from the neck down. A ventilator hums through the night. Tubes get changed. Machines get maintained. Every 3 or 4 hours, he must be turned. Lights stay on. Sleep gets chopped into rationed intervals like wartime bread. And while the body lies there with no motor function, something else is moving at full speed. Meaning, jealousy, suspicion, watching bank accounts, checking phones, tracking promises, counting what's owed, resenting what's given, fearing replacement by women who, let's be honest, aren't even competing with a person, they're competing with a story. That's the moment the curtain lifts. Because the shock isn't, how can this be happening? The shock is, how can a body with no hands hold so many chains? Answer, it can't. The chains aren't in the room, they're in the agreement. The hidden engine, micro-agreements. No one likes hearing this word, but it's the most compassionate word in the whole situation. Agreement. Not the big agreements, not moving to a new city or taking the job or I'll be your girlfriend. The small agreements. So small they never get counted, so constant they become invisible. Agree to stay, agree to turn, agree to feed, agree to lift, agree to clean, agree to drive, agree to wait, agree to hold a grievance quietly until the next task forces a temporary truce, agree to reset the face and perform fine while the mind is boiling. The ego loves invisible agreements because invisible agreements feel like fate, and fate is the ego's favorite alibi. Then comes the final flourish. Look what the world has done to me. As if the world signed the timesheet. As if the world turned the body at 2 a.m. As if the world checked the phone at 11:48 a.m. As if the world wrote the script and cast the roles and threatened the actor if the actor refused to perform. But the script is being performed because it's believed. And it's believed because it pays. The caretaker halo. Here's part 2, the part most people avoid because it feels mean, but it's actually the only door out. Caretaking often comes with a halo, not the halo of love, the halo of specialness. I'm the one who stays. I'm the one who does what others won't. I'm the one keeping him alive. I'm the one holding this together. That identity can feel like devotion. But devotion doesn't need applause. Specialness does. The ego's most sophisticated move is turning suffering into currency. Pain becomes proof. Exhaustion becomes evidence. Sacrifice becomes status. And the moment sacrifice becomes status, guilt enters like a manager with a clipboard. Because the guilt says, if leaving is possible, staying must be virtuous. If freedom exists, bondage must be noble. If options exist, this must be the best option. So the body keeps doing tasks, and the mind keeps telling the story that justifies the tasks, and the role hardens into identity. Not love, not care. Penance with a paycheck. Why the story must be heard. There's a particular texture to this dynamic, the need to be listened to, not helped. The mind doesn't always want rescue. The mind often wants a witness, to validate the identity the suffering is protecting. Because if the suffering is questioned, the self-concept shakes. And the self-concept is what the ego is feeding, more than the body is feeding anyone else. That's why solutions sound offensive. That's why integration sounds suspicious. That's why not dissolve the whole arrangement feels like an attack. It's not that help is unwanted. It's that help threatens the altar. The ego doesn't want the problem solved. The ego wants the problem meaningful. The puppet episode hidden in plain sight. This is why the Twilight Zone puppet episodes land so hard, because puppets are honest metaphors. No one looks at a dummy and argues about whether it has a soul. No one panics because the puppet is gaslighting. Everyone knows what's happening. A voice is being thrown. A story is being projected. A character is being animated by belief. But put the same mechanism inside a relationship, and suddenly it's sacred. Suddenly it's real. Suddenly it's complicated. It isn't complicated. It's Mika, Lika, hi, Mika, Heidi-ho. The puppet speaks and the room obeys. Not because the puppet is powerful, because the mind agrees to be spellbound. Workbook Lesson 1 and Workbook Lesson 2 with a ventilator humming in the background. This is where the early workbook lessons aren't introductory, they're surgical. Workbook Lesson 1 says nothing seen means anything, not as an insult to life, as a diagnosis of projection. Meaning is not in the object. Meaning is in the mind that assigns it. Then Workbook Lesson 2 says the upset isn't for the reason believed. The upset looks like him. The upset looks like the other women. The upset looks like money. The upset looks like the job. The upset looks like being trapped. But the upset is coming from a deeper place. The terror that the identity built around the role might be optional. And if it's optional, then it's not true. And if it's not true, then what is? That's where people get scared. Not scared of the situation, scared of the emptiness underneath the story. Because underneath the story is the possibility that there is, literally, nobody there in the way the ego insists. Not nobody as in lonely. Nobody as in there is no separate self with independent power doing something to another separate self. That's the fear. And it's why the ego prefers the ventilator hum to the silence of truth. The world is a wish-granting machine. Jambi grants wishes in a kids' show. The ego grants wishes in adult life. It says, want to feel needed? Here's a situation where need never ends. Want to feel righteous? Here's a setup where resentment can masquerade as morality. Want to feel chosen? Here's a triangle with endless rivals. Want to feel special? Here's a task no one else wants, so the identity can shine. The ego is a genie that always grants the wish, and then charges interest. That's why it's never just the caregiving. It's caregiving plus surveillance, caregiving plus jealousy, caregiving plus guilt, caregiving plus fear, caregiving plus bargaining with time. I'll give it until March. That's not love. That's a contract with a talking head. The punchline that isn't a joke. Here's the funniest part, in the darkest sense. The talking head has no hands, so it cannot force anything. It cannot force feeding. It cannot force turning. It cannot force staying. It cannot force checking the phone. It cannot force resentment. Yet resentment often treats the talking head like a tyrant. Why? Because the tyrant is not the body. The tyrant is not the machine. The tyrant is not the money. The tyrant is the unexamined premise. This is happening to me. That sentence is the plug. That sentence is the power cord. Pull that sentence, question it, look at it, stop worshipping it, and the entire apparatus starts to lose authority. Not necessarily the external tasks, the internal bondage. And that is the difference between care and suffering. Care can remain. Suffering is optional. Pulling the plug on a thing that isn't a thing. There's a kind of mercy in keeping the limbs in the picture, keeping the machines, keeping it concrete. Because if the mind jumped straight to "there is no body," most people would panic. So the lesson becomes gentler and sharper at the same time. Fine, keep the body. Now watch where the power truly is. Watch the agreements. Watch the micro yeses. Watch the story that turns repeated consent into victimhood. Then, without mockery, without cruelty, without denial, the spell can be named. Mika. Lika. Hi. Mika. Heidi-ho. Not as a joke, as a translation. A way of saying, this thing looks like power, but it's only a wish-granting phrase with no hands behind it. And when that's seen, something profound happens. The world doesn't need to be attacked. The body doesn't need to be hated. The role doesn't need to be shamed. Only the belief needs to be questioned. Because once the wizard is seen behind the curtain can stay exactly where it is, and fear still disappears. That's the real miracle. Not a new situation, a new interpretation. Not a new body, a new mind. And the funniest, cleanest truth of all is this. The plug was never attached to the machine. The plug was attached to the meaning. Pull it there,